Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network invite you to discover your mission, a brand new in-depth monthly video series featuring engaging Catholic speakers who will challenge you to live your life abundantly. For only $25 a month, you will receive a personal monthly mission, including 3 full-length inspirational talks that build upon a new theme each month. Sign up for the Discover Your Mission tier at patreon.com/patchworkheartministry today.
Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry present Journeys in Faith. Now, here's Andy Santis.
Hello, welcome to Journeys in Faith here on this Friday evening. It's great to be here. This is Ann DeSantis on Fiat Ministry Network, and I have an amazing guest for you this evening. I have Ray Haywood. He is a husband, a father, and a Catholic author. He's also been a guest on my podcast with Bill Snyder on the Sowing Hope podcast before. So welcome, Ray. Thanks so much for joining us on Journeys in Faith.
Thank you, Ann, for spending some time with me.
Yeah, we have so much to talk about. Now, for those of you who have heard Ray's story before, you're going to get a real treat, because not only is he going to tell us more about his own faith journey, but we have a great topic this evening, as we're going to talk about the role of husbands, fathers, and men in the lives of their families when it comes to faith and attendance at Mass. So that's something that we'll probably talk a little more on the second half. But for the first half of the show, let me start out with Ray's bio. He's an amazing bio. He's a devoted husband to his wife, Natalie. They have been married for the past 32 years. Together, they intentionally raised 2 faith-filled sons, Nicholas and Frank, within the foundation of faith and the sacraments. Ray shares in more than 28 years of willful fatherhood and co-parenting experience. Ray and Natalie live in Harrisburg, North Carolina, and are faithful parishioners of St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. Through active parish enrollment, Ray's family's faith continues to grow in the new covenant teachings of the Catholic Church. He is devoted to handing on faith-filled gifts to all men of faith, wherever they may be in their faith journey. He finds this to be his call to action in his own faith journey. He is one of the founding members of the Fraternity of St. Joseph's Men's Group that had their inaugural meeting on November 2nd of 2019. And you can connect with Ray at trjfathersguide@gmail.com. Well, of course, we're going to repeat that later on in the show. So Ray, again, welcome to Journeys in Faith.
Yes, thank you, Ann. Thank you so much. Before we came on, you said you would like me to share a little about my faith journey. So, I'm 54, and when my wife and I were my children's age, we already knew where we were in our faith journey. Society, things weren't as confusing for us when we were younger. I'm sure you can relate. So now, what brought me to stepping closer to my faith and writing the book, Tools to Ready the Journey, was the realization that our children, my sons, are challenged tremendously in their faith journey, in navigating the physical world. So in that realization, I slowly measured out proper doses. I say a lot of times, the measure in which we measure. I believe that my Heavenly Father gave me my faith, the faith that I own now, in measured out proper doses. And, when you step closer to your faith and you start to not only believe, but belong to the body of Christ, now the encouragement of others, like what we do, like what we're doing here right now, we're trying to encourage others to step closer to the path. And this is not something that I always felt. I wasn't always intentional. Meanwhile, intentional is a word I use many times in a day now.
It's a good word because what it indicates is that there's a direction. And I know that that's an important part of the faith journey, is having some kind of direction from God and through your prayer life and being intentional about everything that you do with your faith and with your life.
You still see the picture of me? Because I don't see you anymore.
I do.
Okay, so we could just continue like this.
Yes,
This
that's
is
right. Thank you.
all right. So as all of the challenges came before my sons over the last, I would say, 6 or 7 years, I've become extremely intentional in finding simple answers, placing simple answers in front of my children so that they can navigate this crazy, chaotic, worldly narrative. For these young people, everything's up and down. There's no consistency, I did a talk with the UNC Charlotte Catholic Campus Ministry. And one of the things I was very intentional to share with them was that, my life is here. It's very, everything is close for me. So I live very consistently. I can navigate well. But, when you're young, it's hard to navigate. You have to try to find yourself and come closer.
Yes, everything that you're saying is true because, first of all, just to address what you said before, that it is a different world than when you and I were, well, as I was saying, it's that whole idea of being intentional, as you said, with the fact that it is a different world compared to what it was when you and I were younger. And I mean both in the world in general and also in the Catholic Church, and in the fact that numbers are down, let's face it. I mean, especially after this pandemic, we pray very hard that people do come back to Mass and come back to the realization of the importance of holding on to and practicing the Catholic faith. And I know we're going to unpack a lot of that in the discussion that we'll have about men's role, right? Fathers and husbands' roles in the church. But let's backtrack, if we could, a little bit. You were talking about your own experience as a husband and a father, and also your faith journey. So take us back, if you could, to your own upbringing, and what was your faith like back at that time when you were being raised by your family?
So beautiful. I come from my father, anybody in the community, everybody knew my dad, my mom. I grew up in Brooklyn, the community that we lived in, literally community. Like, we knew everybody knew us. I went to St. Mark's Catholic Church. That's the parish that my parents got married in. It's the parish that I got my sacraments in. I got married there. The children that I went to school with, their siblings went to school with my brothers and sisters. My parents went to school with their parents. I mean, it's unbelievable, the sense of community. And now our children, their communities are in their phones. So they don't have that sense of community. All of these things come into awareness, I look at those people that I'm still connected with in social media, and I even go to some of their houses. They're my St. Mark siblings. That's what I call them, because we grew up like the faith was beautiful, so now here we are, I'm transplant. We raised our family for a little while in Staten Island. Then we moved to North Carolina in 2008, and we become part of a parish. My youngest son made his confirmation here. So things aren't as consistent for our children. Like, I did everything in Brooklyn. My mother and father weren't even living in Brooklyn when my father passed, but yet my father's funeral mass was at St. Mark's. That's the type of community that it is. You know, you belong there. My mother didn't even have to think twice. That's where my father was going to be buried from. You know, his funeral mass would be. So, you know, and I look at my sons and I look at the challenges that they have, and I I, I don't know how, but somehow or other, I came into the awareness of sharing these types of things. I wrote the book, Tools to Ready the Journey. As I was writing it, I reached out to men that were already in that type of a world. I don't know if you ever heard of Steve Wood, but I reached out to Steve Wood. He's got an amazing, back in 2017, maybe like September, October, he has a talk on faith and justification. And if you could take time to go back and look at his podcast, as a cradle Catholic, it gives you answers to questions you didn't need to, you didn't even think to ask. And it makes you so strong in your Catholic faith. It brings into awareness some beautiful things. So as I'm talking to him and he's telling me, start in my own community, right? He says, that's where we can make change, you know, and the only change we can make, we start in our own communities. That's the way we do it. So then I reached into my community of Knights, the Knights of Columbus, got a very good response from them. Then, you know, I reached out to my pastor, a couple of the leading men in my community, and they, along with we went to dinner one night. My pastor, Father Matthew Codd, he named the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group that night. And then we started to assemble. We had a bulletin entry, and one of the people in the diocese goes to Mass at St. Thomas. They saw the bulletin entry on what we were trying to do, bring all men together of all ages, for us older men to reach into those younger men. Like, I want, as fathers, there's only so much we could do on our own. We need other men. Did you ever hear Bear Wozniak? He talks about uncling. Did you ever hear him say that?
I have. I've had it. He's been a guest on Journeys in Faith, so I think I've heard that before. But if you can re-explain, that would be wonderful.
So what Bear's view is that we need to uncle, more than just be another man in the community. We need to look at these other men, these younger men in our community, and uncle them. Be closer than just another man, you know, like an uncle. And as a father, there's only so much we could do for our children. So we need other men to be a good example, to bring our children closer. Iron sharpens iron. We all need to do this together, and we need to start to change the way we approach each other. We need to approach each other differently. So,
well said, because the role of men in the church is so important, and it has to be addressed. And I know that when we talk on the second half about those statistics that you're going to share with all of us and with me, I think people are going to be pretty surprised to learn about just how important that role is.
So as this all starts to form in our parish, it's during the year of St. Joseph for our diocese. So 2020 was the year of St. Joseph in our diocese. So they asked for some of the leading men in our Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group to be on a team of people who were putting the website together for the diocese. And then, so we went there. Then what they did was they asked if we would create a model of a men's group that other parishes in our diocese could follow in. So now we started to make resource documents and you know, a code of conduct. Our code of conduct says, and this is something I believe men should really take to heart. What we say is important, but the way we say it is even more important, because our children are watching. You know,
Amen.
our young sons and daughters, they don't understand when we interact as adults. You know, there's a time and a place for that. But when we're in front of our children, we have to watch the way that we address each other, because they're watching. We need to approach each other differently. And this is part of that that mindset that Bear shares about uncling, which I think is really awesome. So now things start to mature. And, you know, Bill, hopefully by now, Elvin is in the world with us. Today, Bill and Agnes are having their child. It's a wonderful thing. As we're speaking, this is probably happening. Bill, God bless you. We said a prayer before we came on, Ann and I, for you.
We did. And I should address to our audience who don't know Bill personally, just from the podcast or from the shows, that Bill Snyder is the founder of Patchwork Heart Ministry, which if you go to the YouTube channel there, Patchwork Heart Ministry, that is where the Sowing Hope podcast is produced, as well as Bill's own personal podcast called Young Catholics Respond. He's a great friend of Ray Haywood's, and he's been on Bill's show many, many times. They communicate often. And Bill is a common friend of both Ray's and myself. So on this day, when we're pre-recording the show is coming out on Friday, which is the 7th of May. We're recording it on May 4th. This is the day that Bill and Agnes Snyder's son, Elvin Francesco, is being born. So we send our congratulations to Bill Snyder and Agnes Snyder for their baby boy, Elvin. And please do say a prayer for all those new dads and mothers out there too, right, Ray? I mean, we need to always pray for new families and for the example that we, as people who are older now, I'm in my 50s, so is Ray, now we can set an example for them just in the way that we have raised our own kids and how we live out our faith.
And the intent that a young father has to have, because, when we were growing up, our parents could rest on, their children will eventually get it, because there was moral fiber and family value in society. Society is upside down right now. There's no sense of morality. There's no sense of family value. Everything is askew, and it's intentional that it's askew. So our young fathers and mothers, they have to be way more intentional than we ever were. And they need to be aware. That's an awareness they need to share in. So anyhow, going back to how this all starts to build. So what happens next is Bill and I start doing podcasts on the book. It's amazing. Pete Sachs, another friend of ours, right? Pete does a book. He reviews the book, and he introduces me to Tony Agnesi, another friend of ours, right? And then Tony introduces me to Bill Snyder. And then Bill and I do a podcast, and we decide that we're going to do chapter discussions. And this is perfect because the book starts out with, before you can lead, you must first follow. And then it ends with, before you can intentionally lead, you must first humbly follow. And the messages and the journey in between brings you from that beginning to the intent and the humbleness, humility needed. It's a beautiful thing. So Bill and I start doing chapter discussions. It's on the trjfathersguide.com website. Each chapter has a podcast with Bill and I on it. And on our chapter 5 discussion, it comes into view of paternal leaders. And now, so this comes, Bill and I, we breathed this into, just like anything else. Think of how socialism is starting. An idea gets pushed. You shouldn't say things if you don't want them to happen, because once you say something out loud, a lot of times it starts to take some traction. So Bill and I have this wonderful conversation on spiritual fathers and on spiritual leaders. And while we're talking, we discussed the idea of having paternal leaders in our faith community. So what the idea of a paternal leader is just the same way that our children interact now. Their communities are on their phones. It's a listing that's on the, for us, the stacharlotte.com. There's right on the toolbar, it says paternal leaders. It's actually the St. Joseph paternal leaders. And what it is it's a deacon. The first paternal leaders will be deacons because they're close to church teaching. So deacon, we have Deacon Martin Rickard is our first paternal leader. And what it is it's going to be a way for Catholics who step away from the faith to find their way back. So what we have this vision of is that, let's just say each parish has 2 or 3 paternal leaders. And now as this grows, on the diocese website, all of the parishes will have paternal leaders. So maybe there's 30, 40 different paternal leaders to go and look through. For someone who's trying to find their way back, they could see and read little bios on each one of these deacons, and they could find who they align with, and they could reach out to that person. And the best part about this is that it's going to be a tool of reach, because as we put this into our faith communities every year around the Feast of St. Joseph, our pastors will reach out into the congregations and tell them about these things, these resources. And what'll happen is our young souls sitting in those pews, they'll hear this every year, year after year. And now, you know, when I was younger, I stepped away from my faith. But, you know, back then we got married young. So my wife and I, we needed to get ready to share in the sacrament of marriage. So we needed to go to pre-Cana. And pre-Cana is what brought Natalie and I back to our faith. We started to go back to Mass. You know, that moral posture and that family value that was much part of society back then, we wouldn't ever think of it as just a requirement that needs to be met. When we looked at our faith, and I'm sure you could understand what I'm saying, back then, you didn't just go through a routine. I mean, if you were going to do this, if you were going to understand the sacrament of marriage, the vocation that goes along with it, you're not going to tell the priest you're going to Mass if you're not going. So we started to go back to Mass. But now our children, they just don't get married young anymore. So yes. This tool, not only this, I'm going to explain one other one. This tool will act as an innate way for them to understand how to come back to the faith. Now, we're talking children 6, 8, they start to hear this year after year. So it may not be a moment right now, but later on, this tool of reach is going to come into play. The other thing that we're introducing is called the St. Joseph devotional meeting. And what that is it's a way for somebody who's having a problem in their family. They don't want to call up the secretary and say what the problem is. So what they do is they just call up and say they need a St. Joseph devotional meeting. Now the pastor, the priest, whoever it is that they're going to speak with, understands that there's something going on in the family. That's what the discussion is going to be about, and they know how to prepare. But yet that initial call is going to be placed, because that anxiety, that angst about calling and having to say the reason why, what is this person going to ask me on the other side of the line, is taken out of the context. Because all you have to say is, I need a St. Joseph devotional meeting. And these are just two examples of the different resources that we have. We have Assembly of Men, Code of Conduct. There's bulletin entry. There's everything and anything that you could possibly need as a man trying to start a men's group that's relational. And, I did a podcast with Bill and Deacon Martin and I on presenting St. Joseph paternal leaders to other deacons in our diocese. And one of the things that Bill said, he's on fire, that guy. So yeah. What Bill said was that this men's group is different than others because it goes out and it reaches into the community in a way of building relations. You don't have to be part of this men's group is not about being part of it. It's actually training and guiding and encouragement, which we're all doing, for men of the men's group to reach out into the community, reach out to those young men, tell them that we're here, start to become fathers again, start to reach in and make, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Part of life, right? We're just living life here.
That's right. Exactly. No, I mean, I think it's beautiful, everything that you've said so far, because what I'm hearing is that it's about Catholic mentoring and taking it very seriously out into the community and living it and being a real support system that does outreach. And I think that is beautiful. And I love the idea. I don't remember what it's called. You said it a few moments ago about that call that someone can make and say that they would like to request the St. Joseph's meeting, right?
Joseph devotional meeting.
Devotional
It's
meeting.
as simple as that.
That is
And-
beautiful.
And the St. Joseph paternal leader is going to be someone who is it's going to act as a bridge between our spiritual fathers and our fallen away brothers and sisters. Because this world, it demonizes our spiritual fathers. So for a fallen away Catholic who's listening to the narrative of this world, this secular, worldly narrative that's constantly bombarding them and placing wedges between them and their Catholic faith, the paternal leader is a step closer. And what the paternal leader will do is bring them to the spiritual father. And that's his job. His job is to reach in and to bring that person back lovingly, with humility, all these things that we're not reflecting well. As men, we're doing a lot of mirroring. We're not reflecting well. We're doing mirroring. So this, the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group, if you were to read the documents, the resource documents, you'll see that all of everything, most of it is that we have to start to reflect well as men. And this is going to be a great segue into the next part when we talk about, bringing our families back to church.
Well, I just want to thank you so far for sharing. And you yourself are just an authentic Catholic who really loves God, and you want to do something about it to bring faith to others. And I love everything that you've talked about so far. Now, I want to mention also on the topic of the St. Joseph's devotional meeting that you talked about, there's another resource that I just want to make a shout out to our audience here, which some of them already know about, but the foundation that I represent is the St. Raymond Donatus Foundation, and we offer something called free pastoral accompaniment sessions with a Mercedarian friar, which is the religious order that I'm affiliated with. So on top of everything that Ray's saying, I just want to make that invitation to people watching that if you or someone is in some type of crisis situation, whether it be individually or family related, that you can make an appointment with the foundation that I represent and have a free consultation to talk about those issues. And there's no judgment at all. Like you were saying, Ray, about how sometimes you call that church office and you feel kind of awkward to talk to the parish administrative assistant or whoever is picking up the phone, or that email that you send where you feel like you need to tell them more than just like, I want to talk to Father, right? When you reach out to us, or when you reach out to what Ray is discussing with you, there is no any type of having to worry about that it'll go any further. So I just want to mention that if you want to make that appointment with us, that you go to knonatus.org on our website. Now, Ray, what about if people are watching and they're interested in what you were talking about for their own community? Maybe they live in a different state, Pennsylvania or California or New York or wherever it is. They say, wow, I love what Ray's talking about. How do I implement that in my own parish community?
What I have to do is go to fsjjourneyman.com. And if they were to go to Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group, that's all they would have to look up. You go on to any search engine and you just put in Fraternity of St. Joseph, it's going to bring you to all of it. We have a website. We have flyers, anything that someone would want. Now, I want to share, our sisters in Christ. We need us men. We need you to encourage us. You know how important your children are to you, and if what I'm saying to you is ringing true to you, then poke at your husband. We need you to push us to, a lot of us men are, we're adolescent in our faith, and something like the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group can ignite them. Because if you go further, like let's just talk about the St. Joseph paternal leader. What's going to happen as this all matures in front of us, our pastors are going to be able to turn to other men of goodwill in the congregation and say to them, I think you'd be a good fit to be a St. Joseph paternal leader. I want you to go to our diocese and I want you to get into one of the programs for the lay faithful and become a St. Joseph St. Joseph paternal leader. Now what's going to happen? Other men are going to hear, hey, Ray Haywood was asked to become a paternal leader. How come he was asked? So it's just, we're competitive as men. So now that's going to bring us closer. This is going to push men to a different place. They're going to want to understand what they're talking about. It's not just going to be about going to mass anymore. It's not going to be a routine. We're actually going to start to one of my prayers that I always say is reach into the hearts of men and place within them the will to change their families, their faith communities, and ultimately their public square. And that's what we're going to do. We're ultimately going to change the public square. When we start to do this, when we start to reflect instead of mirror, when we go into the gas station and somebody's being rude to us, and we say a prayer for them and we don't argue back, and our children in our cars see that, think about what's going to happen to the next generation. Our children are going to learn composure. None of us compose ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great example.
And that's why I say it's so important that we recognize what we say, because our children are watching. And this is not an easy thing. Now, I just want to say what I want to go back to something I was saying earlier about when we say something, look at how our society is changing. Our children are having all these ideas placed in their heads. There's none of this. It's all situational truth. None of it is an objective truth. So when this is going to be hard for us men. This isn't easy for me either. But if we start to talk about this and we start to approach this and we make this an awareness to the next generation, they'll be better than us at this. So we need to encouragement. This is how things change. They change within intent. Thoughts become actions, actions become habits, habits become character.
I like how you brought it. You started it out with intention at the beginning of the show, and you brought it back as we're ending for the commercial break. So that was just perfect, Ray. Thank you. Now we do have to take about a 5-minute break or so. So we will be back here on Journeys in Faith in just a few minutes.
Hi, my name is Ann DeSantis, and I'm the director for the St. Raymond Nonatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. You can learn about us on our website at nonatus.org. I'm here to tell you today about 2 great podcasts that I hope that you will tune in. The first Tuesday of every month at 8 o'clock, we have a podcast specifically for Catholics affected by divorce. From 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern, go to Philly Nonatus on YouTube to subscribe. In addition, we also have a podcast the last Thursday of every month. That's also at 8 o'clock Eastern Time for 1 hour. And that one is for families in crisis. We have some really great guests coming up soon, so hope to see you then. Please also consider the fact that you can make spiritual direction appointments with us with our spiritual moderator. All you need to do is go to our website on the contact form and just reach out to us. We'd be happy to hear from you and look forward to setting up an appointment. So we'd love to connect with you. Please share this video and let people know that we're there for families affected by divorce and also families in crisis. Thank you.
Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network present the Discover Your Mission series.
Now, I had been brought up without any prayer, without Bible, without church, nothing of that kind. And so when my father died, I became suicidally depressed. I had no desire to live. And yet, by the grace of God, whenever I got to the point of actually taking my life, I always had this interior conviction that if I took my life, I would simply find it again on the other side, and it would be permanent misery.
But it wasn't until I became a wife and a mother, and I began to try and pass my faith on to my children, that I realized that everything I knew about Jesus was memorized doctrine.
I was a good man, I was a good father, I was instilling the sacraments into my family. I was definitely not intentional. I was stuck broke in my faith.
But what kind of strength did he have? Jackie did not just have a strength of body or baseball skill. He had a strength inside of his spirit, a courageous meekness that empowered him to play the game.
And I tell him what is going on with me, and he's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, no, I think this is like some sort of miracle, dude. And he's like, okay, you know, of course, but I'll believe it when I see it. Honey, you've been trying to quit, and you've been saying this and saying that, and I'm, you know, his big line to me is, you shouldn't say things, because I never follow through on them. And so this was week after week, month after month. He is looking at me like, this is a miracle. There is no way that you, on your own, could have done this.
So we are called to sing. All of us are called to sing. All of us are called to express ourselves and join our voice into the unity of the church. Often with my choirs, I ask them to listen to each other, to listen to the sound that they make together as one. That's what we're aiming for. Through the harmony or unison, we're aiming for a one sound.
You need to decide, what are you going to participate in? Are you going to participate in the historic Christian idea of the altar of sacrifice, which is in the Eucharist, or not?
Welcome back to Journeys in Faith here. This is Ann DeSantis on Fiat Ministry Network. Our tagline is where we say yes to Jesus Christ. And that's what my guest is all about here, Ray Haywood. He is a Catholic father, husband, and also an author. And he was talking on the first half of the show about intention and how important it is to have intention when it comes to raising our families. Of course, he said a lot more than that. But if you want to learn more, just go back and watch the show again, because there's a lot to unpack there. So why don't we pick up where we left off, Ray, about intention and where that leads, because I know that you also wanted to talk about that there's an article that you had referred to me. Now, this article was not a Catholic or a Christian article, but it gives a lot of information about the statistics related to the importance of men of faith and men's attendance at Mass, and how when a father cares about his faith, how that makes a big difference. So please do tell us more, Ray.
That article that I shared with you, I was intentional to find, I came across the article, but then I found value in it because it wasn't an article that was just from a Catholic view. This article is just about all men who attend some type of service, some type of faith gathering. So, you know, this is a human thing that we're speaking of. And, you know, I believe that through the pandemic, we've had so many families step away from Mass. And, you know, I actually did a podcast, you could look it up on YouTube, called The Father Suffers. And what led me to doing that podcast on The Father Suffers was I go to daily Mass every day. And after Mass one day, I went up to my pastor, Father Matthew Codd, and I said to him, you know, Father, I'm having a hard time getting my family back to Mass. This is weighing heavy on me. You know, we got very accustomed to sitting at 11:30 on Sunday in our living room, in our PJs, you know, in our house clothes, watching Mass. And it wasn't sitting well with me anymore. We needed to get back. So I was sharing this with him one day outside of church, and he just turned to me and said 3 simple words. He said, "The Father suffers." And, you know, that led to, you know, that just kept on bouncing around in my head, that, you know, the Father suffers. And it led to a perspective that I shared in a podcast. If you want to check that out, it's really cool. So for the people who are listening along, just search my name, Ray Haywood. You'll find a lot out there, but The Father Suffers is great. And it talks about, intentionally talks about trying to get our families back to Mass, what we're talking about today. So I believe that the worldly narrative, secular, is intentionally taking away all authority from everything. But the main objective is to take the authority away from the Father, both in the domestic church, but also our Heavenly Father. Because when they take God out of everything, then there's no more order. And that's what we're seeing. So us as men, we have to recognize, we have to really, this world also teaches instant gratification. And even for us older people, we're so addicted to our phones, everything is instant gratification. We no longer spend time in thought. We don't self-examine. So with that loss of self-examination and that instant gratification mindset that this world perpetually puts in front of us, chips away at us, puts wedges between everything that we do, we find ourselves not being intentional. So if there was anything that I would encourage a listener to take away from our conversation today, especially our sisters in Christ, is that the authority of the Father, the obedience, the discipline, the humility of a father needs to be understood. And I believe that for men who are hearing this, or for a woman, a wife, even a daughter, as husbands and fathers, if our daughters come to us, we'll listen to them. So, if there's daughters, young women out there, even young men out there listening, go to your father, tell him how important it is for him to find himself in the masculine journey, to self-examine where he belongs in the masculine journey. The first chapter of the book, Tools to Ready the Journey, is the masculine journey. And each chapter has artwork, and the artwork for that is a square, because it squarely puts us on the path. And if we can find ourselves in the masculine journey within the different stages of, which are clearly placed out, then we can understand more about what I'm sharing in self-examination. So let's just go to this article. It's put out by Touchstone. So if somebody wanted to look it up and read it for themselves, it would be easy enough to find. And Journal of Mere Christianity. So you go to Touchstone and you come up a Journal of Mere Christianity, you're on the right article. And, I guess they're taken away from C.S. Lewis a little there, but.
Yeah, is this the article that you sent me? So
yep.
The one that's called, it's The Truth About Men, correct?
So.
The name of the article, I believe, right?
Father's Influence.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that the beginning of it?
Yes.
Okay, so well, I'm going to just take thumbnail sketches out of it so that we can all just quickly come into view, and then maybe that'll ignite some of us to go back and to find it for themselves. But
yes,
what it shares is that if a father does not go to church, only 1 in 50 children will become a churchgoer. 1 in 50.
Wow.
If the father is a regular churchgoer, 2/3 to 3/4 of their children will become churchgoers, which leaves only 25% of their children lost to the faith. Now, if there's no father, just mother attends. Think about this. No, the father doesn't go, just the mother attends. 2% will become regular churchgoers, and 37% will become irregular, but they will attend. So that's over 60% lost completely to the faith. 60%. Now, I want to bring out another thing that was in the article that I found very interesting, is that non-practicing moms, the percentage of children that actually go to church, regular or irregular, goes up. And in the article, it talks about loyalty to dad. Let's put some perspective into that. Think about that. for a moment, where non-practicing moms, the percentage of children that attend as their adults goes up. Some type of a loyalty to the father.
Interesting.
Now, so there's another part of this that we discussed before we went on, and I think that this is something that we'll have a little bit of a conversation on, is dad's non-participation indicates to the children that church is not a real grown-up activity. And that's the reason why so few children go to church if their father does not attend. Think about that. You know, when I've tried to find something to be intentional in this conversation that we're sharing in today, and it taught me something too. You know, this encouragement that we have to reach into others. I found this article. It strengthens me. It strengthens you. But just think of the perspective. Think about self-examining the fact that our children, if we now, let's apply it to other things. The way that we treat our wives, or the way that we treat our in-laws or our parents. You know, do we talk ill of our parents in front of our children? You know, all of these things, you know, we could relate the influence that the father has with the activity of church with so many other things. And this is what we go back to, where the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group is trying to reach into men and make them think and see and to self-examine how what we say is important, but the way we say it is even more important. You know, all of this comes into view if we put our phones down and we start to be intentional in self-examination.
Well, it's living a life, from what you're telling me and from what I'm hearing, that the example of a man to his wife and to his children and to his extended family, to his church family, and ultimately, as you use the word, public square. And I know that you talked about that on one of the other podcasts, and maybe you can explain to our audience, for those who maybe don't understand, what does the public square indicate and what does it mean exactly?
So for me, I use public square quite often because in olden days, when a town would be built, what they would do is they would build the church. Outside of the church, they would make the public square where everybody would gather. And then the town would start to be erected and built around the public square. So if we as Catholics, especially men, were to think about any time that we're outside, it doesn't have to be right outside the doors of our church, but wherever we are, if we look at the public square when we're anywhere, I don't care where it is, if we look at it as right outside of our churches, then we will approach things differently. So I say public square quite often with that type of awareness in mind.
Yeah, it is an awareness, because we might think of it as just like society, right? Or quote, the world. But really the public square is a personal thing, because it's also your own community, right? It's the people that you interact with when you go out to the store, when you go out with friends of yours somewhere, or to some party or something, right? Or even when you go to church and you're outside of the church in the parking lot and you're talking to the people out in the parking lot before you go back to your car. I mean, I'm just giving some examples, but they're all the public square. So, so thank you for sharing on that.
How about we take a little perspective and thinking about when we're getting onto a plane, how these people don't matter to us because we're never going to see them again, you know, and how people interact in that type of situation. They push people out of the way. You know, we don't conduct ourselves very well. And if we were to think and put perspective into any place that we are is right outside the doors of our church, then maybe we'll start to reflect instead of mirror. And our children will see that, and we'll change the trajectory for not only our faith communities, for our families, but also ultimately change the trajectory for our public square. This can all, this can all happen. And the way we start anything is like Steve Wood said to me, in our own communities. That's where you start. You start in your own community, and one of the other things I share often is that I live in a community here where my home is in North Carolina. Used to be an old farm, now it's community, right? And before we get to Tom Query, the road, as people move in and out of the community, people are waving at each other. But as soon as you hit Tom Query and you turn out of the community, there's no more waving. So do we have good intent just until the front door of our house, or maybe where the road ends in our community? Think about that as, put some perspective into that, the way we conduct ourselves.
That makes a lot of sense, because if you think about it, we have our personal relationship in prayer with God, and where God can speak to us through the Holy Spirit, and how we interact with our own families, the people that we live with in house, right? And then we have the extended family, and of course, neighbors and people at church. But really, your faith comes into play even in a greater way when it goes beyond those walls, like you said. It's when you go to the airport and you're standing there in line with all these people that you don't know. How are you going to treat them too? I mean, how are we going to react to people that we don't know? Are we going to care? So I think it's important that you brought that up, because our faith has to be more than just a small prayer that we say between us and God. We got to act on it, right? We got to care. We have to ask questions, and we have to be a good example and have intention, like you just said at the beginning of the show. I think that's a great word for everybody to think about after the show is over, is what is the importance of intention in your own life, whether you are a man, a husband, a father, or if you're a woman, single, married, wherever you are in your life, to have intention with everything that you do. So
onto a plane, and getting onto a plane is where we can really start to hold ourselves in humility. The obedience and discipline that we were speaking about earlier. In order to interact with people who are pushing and shoving and don't care about you, and you still have some humility and have some composure, man, that takes obedience and discipline. Think about this. Now, if we have our family around us, even if it's like my son's 28 and 22, if they were to see me interact well, then that becomes part of their character. And this is how things cascade, and this is how we change the trajectory. So this is no small conversation we're having. This is necessary.
It isn't. And it's not something that's just for this year. We're here on, May 4th, 2021, as we're recording it. But, of course, this recording is going to go a lot further than just May 4th. It will live on. So no matter when you're watching this is a good place to start, that we're not just talking about the present moment. We're talking about the future. And we're talking about the future of our lives, our families, and also the entire world, right? So it's really something to pray about and to consider. Now, as we got about 5, maybe 10 minutes left at the most for this show, Ray, I thought, can you share some godly advice for fathers that do want to grow, they do have a heart to want to make some changes? What are some simple things that you think that they can do to get on a better path?
First thing that I always say to anybody, any man of any age, is to find himself within the masculine journey. Very, 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 very important. When you can find yourself within the masculine journey and understand how that stage interacts with the people around you that you're accountable for, that you will be held accountable for by God, and these awarenesses come clearly into view for you, and there's no more confusion. All the chaos can be taken out of it. Finding yourself in the masculine journey is an extremely important thing to do for a man. Now, for a woman, to own and hold close God's given gift of being the heart of the family, which is so important. So many of our moms. I wanted to finish something up on that article about how church accepts fatherlessness. So many of our moms are single moms, and for their heart, there's something that's challenging to them, and for them to understand their role within God's gift for the family, of them being the heart of the family. Very, very important. Now, that segues into self-examination, because without self-examining ourselves in humility and finding ourselves in our faults and being able to love ourselves past fault and grow from our faults instead of making excuses for them, like what we do when we're young. Think back from when we're young, as 54 years old, I look back, all the excuses I made for faults that I had. Now, through self-examination and humility, when I find a fault of my own, instead of making an excuse for it, what I do is I try to grow from it. And so masculine journey, heart of the family, self-examination builds on those two things. And then, as always, one of the things that was said to me that I hold so dear now is that the only time we truly have peace in life is when we're in prayer. So if you don't have a prayer life, if you don't have the balance of physical, mental, and spiritual well-being to find the center in life, you're always going to be off balance. You have to have that prayer life. You have to have that. You have to nurture your spiritual life. Otherwise, you have a God-sized hole in you. And you need to be able to find that center. And, we're innately children of God. An atheist, he'll never have center because he's innately a child of God. So if he's not working on his spirituality, or she, then they're always going to be angry. Did you ever notice that the people who attend daily mass, they're always peaceful? There's no mistake to that. It's because we understand that prayer is what brings us that peace. So one of the things I say to the kids in the Catholic campus ministry is that when you binge watch Netflix, do you go from episode 1 to episode 8? Of course not. So how could you go through the liturgy of the Mass and go from Sunday to Sunday? It's very important to read. It takes less than 5 minutes to do the readings and the gospel each day. It's a beautiful love story. I mean, you have to take the time each day to self-examine the gospel the way that our church fathers so beautifully placed it out for us in the liturgy.
Amen. So well said. I love having you as a guest, not only here, but on our Sowing Hope podcast. And you're doing really amazing work. Now, is your website, is it trjfathersguide.com? Okay, so I want to repeat that again, trjfathersguide.com. So please do check that out. Ray, any final words before we end?
If I could encourage men to start to reflect instead of mirror, you will definitely change the trajectory for your faith. And this is not an easy challenge that I'm saying. And to understand that your wives and your daughters are the heart of the family, and to treat them as such, these are life-changing things. And the only way that what I'm saying can be accomplished is through humility.
Amen. Thank you, Ray. Thank you for being a guest on Journeys in Faith. And please do come back again. We'll see all of you here next week on Fiat Ministry Network, Journeys in Faith. God bless.
Journeys of Faith is a production of Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry. For more information about Journeys of Faith, email info@fiatministrynetwork.tv. And be sure to friend, follow, and like us on social media. Just search Journeys in Faith with Ann DeSantis.